Hello and welcome to our show. I am your host. Today, we have prepared a special executive report on the recent licensing and commercialization of Vtama brand and generic tapinarof. The report will cover the deal timeline, due diligence analysis, SWOT assessment of the transaction, as well as key value creation insight and strategic trends at play. If you find this briefing useful, please do hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our future content. Let's start with the deal timeline. Initially discovered by GlaxoSmithKline, tapinarof was an experimental aryl hydrocarbon receptor or AHR agonist initially intended for inflammatory skin diseases. Despite showing potential, GSK deprioritized tapinarof internally and eventually licensed the compound to a smaller biopharmaceutical firm called Roivant Sciences in 2018. At that time, GSK had already completed a phase 1 study for tapinarof for the treatment of psoriasis and a phase 2 study for atopic dermatitis. The global rights to tapinarof were transferred to Roivant's wholly owned subsidiary Dermavant for an undisclosed sum, reported to be under $150 million. Following the acquisition, Dermavant ran pivotal phase 3 trials in patients with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis who were candidates for systemic therapy. Top-line results were announced in November of 2020 and showed that tapinarof demonstrated both efficacy and good tolerability. The NDA was subsequently filed with the FDA in mid-2021, and the FDA issued a complete response letter in May of 2020 to requesting additional manufacturing information. Upon resubmission of the NDA in September 2022, the FDA approved Vtama as a once-daily topical treatment for plaque psoriasis, marking the first novel topical treatment for psoriasis in more than 20 years. Fast forward to 2020 for just a couple of months ago. Organon announced the completion of its previously disclosed acquisition of Dermavant for a total deal value of up to $1.2 billion, comprised of an upfront payment of $175 million, plus $950 million in milestone payments and 30% royalties on net sales of Vtama if they exceed $1 billion. Reportedly, the transaction was funded from existing cash on hand and committed financing. Next, let's move on to our due diligence analysis. When Dermavant evaluated the opportunity to license tapinarof from GSK, they likely saw evidence of therapeutic relevance of AHR modulation in dermatological inflammation. They then evaluated the GSK discontinued clinical package, which may have included pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic data as well as safety pharmacology and toxicology studies. They were able to recalibrate the compound for dermatology versus systemic immunology and design trials that focused on the unmet topical treatment needs of chronic inflammatory skin diseases. These included pivotal trials in moderate to severe plaque psoriasis as well as a phase 3 trial in atopic dermatitis. The resulting strong efficacy and tolerability results coupled with a significant unmet need in non-steroidal, non-biologic topical therapies for chronic conditions like psoriasis and atopic dermatitis likely drove the decision to acquire the asset from GSK. When Organon evaluated the opportunity to acquire Dermavant, they likely looked at post-FDA launch metrics such as the adoption curve, payer acceptance, dermatology goal alignment, etc. They probably also evaluated the potential for label expansion into atopic dermatitis and modeled the global commercial rollout. Additionally, they assessed the potential synergies with their existing women's health and primary care portfolio, which could help build prescription volume and drive revenue growth. Lastly, they likely modeled the peak sales potential for Vtama and concluded that it exceeded $1 billion, thereby validating the royalty-triggered component of the deal. Next, we'll conduct a SWOT analysis of the Organon Dermavant Vtama deal. Starting with the strengths, this is a first-in-class non-steroidal topical for plaque psoriasis with a compelling efficacy and safety profile. It addresses a sizable dermatology market with potential for life cycle expansion into atopic dermatitis, seborrheic dermatitis, and other inflammatory dermatologic conditions. Leveraging Organon's commercial strength in chronic disease and women's health should allow the company to build prescription volume over time. Moving on to the weaknesses, the branded and generic competition in the space is highly entrenched. Dermatology detailing likely requires high-frequency engagement and strong patient access support. And uptake of Vtama will depend on payer reimbursement and formulary placement. In terms of opportunities, there is geographic expansion potential into Europe, Asia, and Latin markets, as well as life cycle development in other inflammatory dermatologic conditions. Furthermore, Vtama can be positioned as a steroid-sparing maintenance therapy, which could broaden its appeal. Lastly, there is portfolio synergy with Organon and pipeline in a product potential via the 𝗕𝗟𝗢𝗓 pathway. And finally, in terms of threats, there is biosimilar pressure from established immunology brands. Moreover, a tough prior authorization and generic competition could lower the bar for payer cost-effectiveness. Topical competition could emerge from newer JAK inhibitors or PDE for modulators, and pricing pressure could arise from public and private payers in the US and abroad. Next, we'll move on to our value creation insight. This transaction exemplifies how small to mid-sized biotech firms can extract overlooked value from large pharma legacy assets. Specifically, we see three key components of value creation here. First, indication realignment, where Roivant successfully reframed the clinical application of tapinarof from systemic use to topical dermatology. Second, accelerated development, where leaner R&D management enabled them to execute phase 3 trials quickly and achieve FDA approval within 4 years. Third, monetization pathway, where they de-risk the clinical profile and existing preclinical data, making it easier to attract downstream acquirers like Organon. This case also illustrates how large pharma can benefit from non-core asset licensing. Specifically, GSK likely retained future upside via royalties or equity positions, freed up strategic bandwidth, and validated external innovation while retaining optionality for legacy success. Lastly, let's move on to the market and strategic trends that make this case especially relevant today. We see 4 key trends at play. First, tech push. New mechanistic understanding of the 𝗕𝗟𝗢𝗓 pathway drove the novel compound repositioning. Second, market pull. Chronic dermatology markets demand safer, long-term topical solutions beyond corticosteroids. Third, regulatory support. Dermatology endpoints are well-defined, facilitating accelerated clinical timelines. And fourth, investor validation. The Roivant model proves scalable. License from Pharma, develop quickly and exit strategically. In conclusion, the Vtama brand and generic tapinarof story is a textbook example of how innovation in drug development doesn't always come from discovery, but often from repositioning, refining, and commercializing with the right partner. Roivant acted as the bridge between the scientific potential and market realization. Organon capitalized on a de-risked, approved product with long-term growth potential. And GSK, though initially moving away from tapinarof, ultimately benefits from legacy success if back-end deal terms were preserved. For other biotech developers and licensing officers, the key takeaways include scout and acquire neglected compounds with solid mechanisms, focus on indication translation and biomarker alignment, de-risk through targeted trials and early regulatory engagement, and position assets to attract downstream acquisition, commercialization, or licensing partners. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time.